People
Here we go.
recognize, yeah,
So,
good quality wine.
what is the difference between just a mushroom and a truffle?
Right. So truffles are a really interesting. Noah, a mycologist that comes up here in the area, he wrote the Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. What's his last name? And he just did a great Noah Siegel. This is a book he did with Christian Schwartz. It's just like the best book we have now for mushrooms of the Redwood Coast that we have for, from Oregon to the Bay Area. It's like our bioregion of the redwoods, the coastal redwood mushrooms, so it's just like the most up-to-date, accurate book. He just did a great talk on the Humboldt Bay Mycological Society's Myco Blitz week. Instead of, the usual fair, we had the online, virtual mushroom fair. And he just did a great talk about truffles. So it's a real new field for me. I don't know that much about it. But what seems to happen is these mushrooms that often did create above ground fruiting bodies due to climate and weather and just adaptability started, producing these underground fruiting bodies that were getting dug up and eaten by rodents and dispersed, and their spores were getting dispersed, often by little pieces getting dropped, and the spores' ability to live through the GI tracts of squirrels decided over, thousands and thousands of years, why push up above ground where it's hot and dry and wet and things step on me and animals eat me, and my fruiting bodies get damaged before I mature. These truffles adapted to this mammalian relationship of little squirrels and rodents and humans too, digging these up and eating them and spreading them around. And so that became its spore dispersal instead of producing a fruiting body by pushing it up out of the ground and then dispersing its spores that way. So it's really trippy. I mean, this presentation he did, you can see mushrooms that are like inverting in back into like going to a truffle. Like they still kind of look like a mushroom, but then they just don't come out of the ground anymore.
Huh. So it was
Yeah.
like an evolutionary advantage
Yeah.
to fend off predators.
Yeah. And really and fires and droughts and and all
Yeah.
these and floods and animals stepping on you before you can mature and disperse your spores, so really interesting. New Zealand has some really bizarre fungal bird relationships where they've adapted to be eaten by all the because they have, they don't have a lot of land predators. So they have all these ground birds there. And so all these mushrooms have turned into things that look like berries and look like food, that are just tiny little, almost truffle like mushrooms that don't even grow into full fruiting bodies anymore, that the birds eat. And it passes through the bird's GI tract and disperses the spores that way. So
It's incredible how different types of fungus have adapted methods like that, right, to spread their spores. I mean,
yeah,
you have that, I can't think of the scientific name for it, but it's like coined the zombie fungus,
right.
and it spreads its spores, and if an ant hits it, it kind of takes over the ant's nervous system and can control the ant and tries to walk it back to its colony so that it can infect the whole colony. And if ants, they can kind of sense, I think through pheromones, that one of their ants is infected, and they'll move it farther away from the colony so that the rest of the colony is protected. I mean, that's incredible that they can do that.
Yeah, that you would adapt to attack something's nervous system, but not kill it right away, to drive it crazy enough to either, yeah, go back to the colony, or some bugs will climb really high up trees, that higher than they usually go, and which is a great spore dispersal spot, and then clamp onto the tree, and then the mushroom will fruit out of the insect. And Yeah, cordyceps are one of the big families. Yeah,
Yeah, all in the name of reproduction and trying to
yeah,
spread yourself as far as you can.
yes. You just hope they don't take liking to us like that or something.
Yeah, right. Well, that's have you heard about, the theory regarding like our body temperature and how 98.6 it's the perfect temperature to fend off fungus, and yet we're
Exactly.
not burning too many calories in keeping ourselves that warm?
Yes.
I mean, it's insane when you think
Yeah.
about that and how global warming and the warming temperatures, and you have fungus that are adapting to these warmer temperatures, and what that could mean if you extrapolate it to us, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And what that means over eons and eons, when you really look and understand that some of the most advanced life forms very early on were these fungal colonies. And so to get in a relationship, to either not become a host or to eat them as food or whatever, quickly became dependent upon your relationship with fungus. Whether you were a tree, whether you were an insect or a mammal, and how it drove evolution, through time and developed ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Well, they think that's why mammals thrived after the asteroids that wiped out the dinosaurs, right? One theory is that the asteroid hit, and as a result of all these decomposing bodies, fungus thrived and it was everywhere. And because of mammals' body temperatures, they were able to come out and kind of thrive in that environment because the fungus wouldn't hurt us like it would a reptile, where it could, or an ant, or these different organisms.
Yeah. And of course, there's parasitic fungi that attack trees and attack reptiles and cause infections in humans, and just like viruses and the virus we're dealing with right now. But more often than not, what you see is sort of this with those type of fungi and viruses and things. You see this sort of wolf in the ecosystem, where of course there's honey mushrooms, amalaria that attacks trees, but when you go in a healthy ecosystem, it's not killing the forest, it's just over here on this one tree. But
Mm-hmm.
when you tree farm tons of trees, and they're stressed from drought, and you have insect attacks and you have fungal attacks, and then you hear about the fear that the forest industry has of this parasitic fungus, and you're like, well, that's existed forever and it wasn't wiping out forests on the planet, just like viruses weren't like wiping out mammals. It was just kind of keeps them in check, so to speak, when populations rise up, when ecosystems get damaged. And so a lot of these things, especially like sapphiritic fungi, when you step back and look at take a bird's eye view of the ecosystem, and you see that, say for instance, to use oyster mushrooms as a common mushroom, what is it striving to do in this ecosystem? And it's breaking down these cellulose and lignin walls of this wood faster than just about anything else on the planet can, turning it into mulch, and effectively then bacteria and other fungi turning it into, and insects and vertebrates turning it into soil, and that soil is feeding those trees, which is growing more food for the fungus, the oyster mushrooms. And so you see the motivation and the intention that these organisms have to create diversity and to create ecological balance and equilibrium in the systems. And which is also just as amazing when you look at the ability of oyster mushroom to break down hydrocarbons. Like, how did that come about? The ability to molecularly disassemble chemicals and really complex compounds to dissolve it, you could simply just say, oh, it just wanted to get the carbohydrates out of that wood. It just wanted to get the carbohydrates out of that hydrocarbon. And sure, that's a simplistic way to look at it. But again, taking that bird's eye view and looking at the big picture, and you say, well, the more toxins you can break down in the environment, the more wood you can break down in the environment, the more soil and biodiversity you create, you're going to grow more trees. And the more trees that fall and start and become food for the fungus, the more the fungus can thrive, so there's an intention there that I think is really important to look at.